You're listening to The Last Easy Mile, a show for men who know there's more waiting but aren't sure where to begin. I'm Josh Farahi. Whether it's carving out space for adventure, being a more present and intentional father, reconnecting with your physical edge, or rediscovering a forgotten skill, this podcast is about moving from stuck to in motion. Each episode explores that in-between moment, right before the leap, when the excuses run out and something real needs to begin. We cover fatherhood, work, faith, creativity, and what it means to keep showing up, especially when no one's coming to rescue you. Welcome to The Last Easy Mile. Let's walk it together. No.
Good. That's because you're careful about it.
Yeah, that's right. But I wanted to thank you, man. I mean, just taking the time to come and talk to us. And I've been fascinated really with, really just how the ancients or how what we've left behind kind of with our diet for a long time. It kind of stemmed from, I read the book Sapiens by Val Harari. I don't know if you've heard of it.
It's a great book, yeah.
It's amazing. There was one line in that or one chapter in that book, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, in such and such a year we domesticated corn, and then he said, but maybe we're looking at the wrong way. Maybe corn domesticated us because we use so much of our resources and everything for that. And then that kind of just opened up this whole thing for me. I'm like, what are we missing? Why are we such on a corn heavy diet with all these sugars? And so then that's how I stumbled upon you and your work. And I read your book here, Eat Like a Human, which was really great. I really enjoyed this book, especially the recipes. And so I was like, I'm going to reach out. And is it okay if I call you Bill, or do you go by Dr. Schindler?
Bill's perfect.
You've earned it, man. So,
Bill
so
is
I always
perfect.
say to all right, Bill, thanks. So I said, let me reach out and see if I can get lucky enough for him to come on. So I appreciate it. And, get to pick your brain for a little bit. What maybe tell us a little bit about your journey and how you kind of stumbled upon this life journey that you're on.
I'd be happy to. First off, thank you so much for having me. I'd
course.
love any opportunity to share the work that we're doing. It's so incredibly meaningful to me, my wife, my family, our team here at the Modern Stone Age. It's great. So my access to this lifestyle, I guess, or at least point of view, which literally shapes everything that we do, the way we view the world, the way we view our place in the world, has stemmed from a really interesting journey, a lifelong journey, like so many of us have had, where my goal initially was to transform my own relationship with food and get healthy. That was it. And it was a multi-decade journey. And when I started to use my academic training, I'm an archaeologist by training, archaeologist, anthropologist, and I taught at the college university level for over 20 years. My work as an archaeologist was where, when I turned to that information, the stuff coming from the archaeological record, the interpretations of how we truly, genuinely ate over not only hundreds of years, but thousands of years and hundreds of thousands of years and millions of years, my diet transformed. Like for the first time in my life, I was creating a healthy relationship with food. And I looked at food as something that nourished me, not something that made me fat, not something that made me sick, not something that made me have, diarrhea, whatever it is. And
Sure.
I went through all those stages, and I know so many people listening probably either went through that or unfortunately may still be going through it. Everything about my life changed. And the cool thing that we realized about food and humans is that to be fully nourished as a human means something completely different than any other organism on this planet getting fully nourished. For any other organism on this planet, nourishment through food comes from getting the right macronutrients and micronutrients and making sure they can digest it properly. And that's the end of the story. Those things are incredibly important to humans for sure. But food is wrapped up in every single thing that we are, what we do, how we view the world, our relationships, everything. So to be fully nourished as a human, it's much more complicated. We need to make sure that unfortunately, it's much more complicated. We need to make sure we get all those nutrients in the right way for our bodies, but we also have to get them in the right way. We have to fulfill our cultural needs, and for some people, our religious needs or our political needs or our, traditional needs, whatever it is. So as I started to heal myself with food, I realized that so many other parts of my life were falling into place and I was getting fully connected. So because I was doing all the cooking in the family, it transformed my wife's health. It transformed my family's health. That's why we wrote the book, to just share it as much as we could. There's no mention of our restaurant in the book because it didn't start until after the book came out, but
Right.
it actually became the platform for our entire restaurant, Modern Stone Age Kitchen. And those 75 recipes in that book, I can tell you from experience now, not only was the basis of everything we did as a family, but now is the basis for a commercial food operation as well.
Amazing. Yeah, I went to the website for the restaurant. It looks amazing. For all of us West Coasters, though, it's a bit out of reach. You guys have one location right now in Maryland, right?
Currently, it's just one, yeah.
Look, if you could get that to take off and provide a few of these, but we need more of that where, and we'll get into some of the stuff that you guys do that's vastly different than like modern commercial kitchens. But it's cool stuff. When you started this journey of like trying to figure out what changes to make, what were kind of the first few steps that you changed and then you felt and then you were like, wait a second, I might be onto something.
You have to remember, leading up to when I really started to make these changes, I was always changing my diet. Or at least I thought I was changing it for the better, but none of these things were. I went on I did everything from Weight Watchers to South Beach. I mean, all these
Right.
diets. None of them stuck. I saw temporary progress in many of them, but none of it stuck. None of it was a lifestyle change. None of it actually healed me the way that I needed to be healed. I wrestled for Ohio State, one of the best Division I programs in the country. We had team doctors, we had nutritionists, we had all these things. So long, but none of this helped. When I started, one of the biggest changes, and this isn't a throwaway answer. This is actually a genuine answer to your question.
Okay.
Is when one of the biggest changes that I made was that I trusted myself. That I didn't. I knew that I had to inform myself. I knew that through millions of years of evolutionary pressures, I am here because my ancestors, and we're all here because our ancestors listened to their senses and were able to decide for themselves what to put in their mouth, what not to put in their mouth, how much to put in their mouth, when to stop eating, all of those things. So what I knew I needed to do was reconnect at that level where I could start to trust myself. I knew I needed to understand food, how it's made, how it was made traditionally, what's different about the modern food system. So that reconnection, that was one of the big changes. I know it's not what you were looking for, but that was a big one. But part of that journey was not listening to a lot of the mantra that was out at the time. And I know there's so many amazing conversations going on in the food world, but for me, one of the big changes was raw milk. I mean, I grew up in New Jersey where raw milk is still illegal in most cases. I'm in Maryland now where it's one of the worst states in the country for raw
Right.
milk. I started bucking the system with something as simple as raw milk. And when I started to trust raw milk and get into that mindset that, hey, everything that I look up on the internet, if you Googled 20 years ago raw milk, and should I feed my family raw milk?
Right. It's like
I can't
toxic.
believe the cops weren't going to be at the front door arresting me. The information was that bad. So things like bucking the system, starting to dip your feet into something like raw milk, and then from there understanding how that raw milk could be transformed into all these nourishing things like real fermented butter and kefir and real cheeses and those
Right.
sorts.
Well, let's talk about raw milk for a second because we've been told, to your point, that like it's dangerous and it's. I mean, I think raw milk has a branding problem. It should just be called real milk.
Yeah,
The word raw kind of is like off putting. It's just real milk, right? And I've tasted it. It's wonderful. It's admittedly it's not a big part of my diet because it's hard to get. But what makes raw milk so beneficial to humans today versus what the process it goes through to get to us, via the grocery store?
that's a great question. First off, the comment you just made was brilliant. You're right. The marketing is bad on it. It's kind of like I always had a problem. Now most places are non-smoking, but I always had a problem that they had a non-smoking area. And the mindset on that was completely wrong. It should be everything is non-smoking. And if you choose to smoke, that's a smoking area. It's the
Yeah,
same thing.
yeah, yeah.
This is milk. And then there's all the other stuff at the grocery store that should be labeled to let you know it's not milk. So a couple things to sort of ground everyone in this conversation before we start. Number one, there's only one food in the world perfectly designed for humans, and only one food in the world that humans are perfectly designed to consume, and that's milk from our mothers when we're infants. Now, when
Right.
we get weaned off our mothers, there's a lot of biological changes that happen in us and also every other mammal on the planet. But for that moment of time in our life, it is literally the single best food for us to consume, and we are perfectly designed to consume it. Most foods that we consume, I don't care if it is wheat or kidney beans or ribeye, whatever it is, requires us to do something to it to make it safe and nourishing as it can be. So there, again, that is a incredible food. It is our foundational food as humans and as mammals in general. So period, that's amazing. We do have to recognize though that when we get weaned, there are things that change inside of us biologically. For many of us, we're not producing lactase anymore, the enzyme that breaks down the lactose, the sugars in the milk. And there's other changes that happen as well. We reduce enzyme production for things like lipase and some protease enzymes. So when we get weaned, it in its original state isn't perfect for us any longer. But that doesn't mean, so some people take that as, oh, well, we shouldn't be drinking milk. Like we shouldn't be drinking milk at all as humans. Well, that's not true. If you go by, if that's the train of thought, then we shouldn't eat almost literally everything we put into our mouths because we have to do something to everything that we eat to make it as safe and nourishing as it can be. So the better question is, what can we do to milk the same way, the same approach to all these other things? What can we do to it to make it as safe and nourishing as it can be? And the cool thing is that when we drink from our mothers as infant mammals, all mammals do this, we actually ferment the milk in our stomachs and we're actually making cheese. We're going through the same cheese making processes in our biology that traditional cheesemakers do outside of our body. So again, if the mindset is, okay, how do I make this as safe and nourishing as it can be? And this was a perfect food for me when I was an infant. Can I replicate that process outside of our body? Because that's what we as humans do to our food before it even goes into my mouth. That's something to think about. And raw milk will do that. You can take raw milk and put it through those same processes that we happen in our body, whether we're making things like kefir or yogurt or very traditional cheeses or kleb or a bunch of different things, and turn it into what was actually happening into our bodies. Amazing. One of the things we have to understand about milk from the modern industrial food system is that most of that milk will not go through that process. It is so deteriorated. The proteins have been screwed up so bad, especially when things are getting into ultra processed and, ultra pasteurized and ultra high temperature pasteurized milk. It is physically unable to be made into cheese and some of these other fermented dairy products, which means it doesn't even have the ability to have done what happened in milk inside of our bodies to make, this perfectly designed for us humans. So from a very sort of 40,000 foot view, to me, the kind of milk that you get at the grocery store should never touch our lips. It is not only have we grown it, but it can't go through those biological processes. So good raw milk is an amazing foundational food. Good raw milk that's been fermented and gone through those steps. Again, traditional raw milk cheeses, kefir made out of raw milk, yogurt made out of raw milk. This is the gold standard for me, the next step better than raw milk. And the other cool thing is when it goes through that fermentation process, it actually gets safer to consume. It's not only more nourishing and, you develop these flavors and aromas that are amazing, but it's actually safer. But one thing I do need people to understand, and the problem is when you're listening to all of these voices in the nutritional world, and many people are just yelling at each other, yelling into Instagram, TikTok, we tend to fall into these sort of dichotomous arguments. It's either all of this or none of this, and that's the reality is good raw milk is an amazing food. Fermented raw milk is even better, but a good raw milk is an incredible food. We've been consuming raw milk as adult humans from other animals for at least 8,000 years, safely. There is such a thing as bad raw milk. And I think people do need to understand that good raw milk is amazing, bad raw milk is a dangerous food. So if you are going to consume raw milk, then my suggestion is just like everything else in your diet, you need to be connected. You need to take links out of your food chain. You need to go and look at this food and see where it's being made. Pennsylvania is not far from us. You can go to a health food store in Pennsylvania and buy raw milk. You can go to the farm or you can go to certain stores and get it. My suggestion is you always go to the farm, at least in the beginning of when you're buying it, because you as the consumer, and this is the same for everything, but since we're talking about, you want to see the cows, you want to see how they're treated, you want to see the people that are milking them, you want to see how the milk is treated, and you then make the decision for yourself whether it's a good product or not.
What are some of the dangers? I mean, look, we deal with food all the time that if it's not handled properly, it's dangerous. For example, we have E. coli in chicken. If you don't
Yeah.
cook it, you can get sick. We eat oysters all the time, which are really scary stuff if you get into it. But on the scale of scary things that can happen not handling food properly, where does raw milk kind of lie? I don't know if I'm asking the question the right way, but the danger of getting E. coli from chicken is relatively limited, but it's pretty bad when you get sick. So, how does that as it relates to raw milk?
It's a very interesting question, and it's a hard one to answer. And I don't feel that I am qualified to fully answer it, but I'll tell you at least what my viewpoint is on it.
Okay.
You have a much better chance of getting sick from E. coli on lettuce at the grocery store than you do
There you go.
from raw milk.
There you
But
go.
again, it falls into two camps because first of all, we can have a conversation just talk about milk. Should humans drink milk? Well, that's a silly conversation because we're talking about everything ultra high temperature milk to rum. But even with raw milk, a good farm, a good farm that's taking care of their cows, small farm, the farmers know the name of every cow that they're milking. They handle the milk properly. The cows are on the diets they should be on. All of those things are happening. The chances for something happening with that raw milk they're not zero, but they're very, very, very.
Yeah, I mean, we all take risks when we go out to eat anyway, in someone else's kitchen at a restaurant. So my point and that I was trying to make, and I think you helped illustrate it, is there's risks in every food we eat. But I think raw milk, and I've read a lot about it recently, and I heard Joe Rogan talking about it too. So it's in the zeitgeist right now of our culture. And so, is there any resources out there where we could find farms in our local areas that provide this? I know there's a lot of laws and different things you got to navigate to even get it.
The best resource that I know of in so the Weston Price Foundation is one of the leading advocates of raw milk in the world. They literally are leading the charge in the world, and it's an amazing organization. On their website, they have a link to something they've developed I think it's called the Real Milk Finder. If you go to the Weston Price Foundation, you'll find it very, very easily. It's up front and center. And they have map on there of the entire country, and you can go state by state and not only understand what the laws are about raw milk, but also sources of raw milk in those states. And again, it's complicated because it's a state by state thing.
Right.
Here in Maryland, you're allowed to buy it as pet food. In Pennsylvania, you can buy it on farm or off, and someplace. So it's very complicated. The landscape for it is always changing. But I would say one of the most rewarding things that you could do if you're dipping your feet in this sort of traditional ancestral food system and way of life and way of thinking about food, which is transformative, I promise you, in a very positive way, is to find a very good source of raw milk, get over that hump, drink it, consume it, use it, and then start doing things with that raw milk, because you can do things with that raw milk. And raw milk has all the bacteria in it naturally to make every cheese on the planet, except for blue cheese, without adding any bacteria whatsoever. Like, it can be turned into everything from brie to mozzarella, meat. And so when you start playing with that milk, experimenting with that milk, turning it into things like kefir or yogurt, which are very, very easy first steps, your knowledge about what's happening to the food in your dairy aisle, it will completely change. Completely change. I'll give you a great example. My wife and I were just at one of the most celebrated pizza places in the country. I was so excited to go there. And one of the things that they shout about on their menu is that they make all their mozzarella in-house. Well, we've noticed since we own a restaurant here, we make all of our cheese completely in-house. We do pizza nights every Friday night here, wood-fired pizzas. We make every element of that completely from scratch. Long, wild fermented sourdough crust. We make all the cheese. We butcher local pigs and make the pepperoni and the sausage. Everything on that pizza is made entirely from local ingredients in-house, 100%.
Wow.
So when we go to another place and they say, hey, we make the cheese in-house, especially at a pizza place, here's the question that you need to ask. You ask them where they get their milk from. That's the question. And we were sitting at this incredibly, very celebrated pizza place. My wife asked, oh, you make the mozzarella? Absolutely. Where do you get the milk from? And the waitress, she stopped. She goes, I don't know. I'll ask. So she went to the back and she asked and came back. And she says, oh, we don't make it from milk. We make it from curd. Like, she was very proud of this. And let me tell you what that means. One of the most bastardized cheeses in this country is mozzarella. And there's two ways to make mozzarella. There's one traditional way and one shortcut way. To make mozzarella cheese, traditionally, you start with raw milk, or nowadays, if you can't legally do that, you reintroduce the bacteria if it's pasteurized, and the bacteria start eating the lactose. As they're eating the lactose and all these chemical and physical changes are happening, it becomes more acidic because it's releasing lactic acid. When it gets down to a certain pH, 5.2, you can heat it up and stretch the curd. So everybody's seen mozzarella stretch, right? You can stretch this mozzarella.
Right.
This is when you get to that point, it is a fully fermented, gorgeous food that not only has developed all this flavor, but is a completely different food in a number of different ways. If you are lactose intolerant, one of the major reasons it's different is because the bacteria has eaten most of or all of the lactose, depending how long it's fermented. So it's a lactose-free food or very close to it. So that's a traditional way to do it. It takes between 6 and 8 hours usually to get to that point. That's how we do it. That's the way it's done traditionally. It's not shelf stable that way as curd. Once you hit that 5.2 pH, if it continues to ferment, which it will, you'll get too low and you can't make the cheese out of it any longer. Most mozzarella in this country, instead of going through the 8-hour fermentation process, is transformed immediately in less than a second into that right pH by adding citric acid, lactic acid, or acetic acid, which is vinegar. So you add that to the milk, the pH drops artificially, and then you can stretch it. The interesting thing in the food world is that because you've done that artificially by adding an acid to it, it doesn't change. So you could make this curd, sell it, sit it in your walk-in for a month, and anytime you want to make your fresh mozzarella piece, you stretch it. And that's what almost every single restaurant is doing. It is not cheese. It is not cheese. So from a health perspective, it is, and I mentioned earlier, one of the things we can do to dairy is replicate what was happening in our stomachs and our bodies when we were infants. It hasn't gone through that process. If you're lactose intolerant, you might as well drink a glass of milk. You're going to be on the toilet in a half an hour. It isn't the same thing. So when they say they made it from curd, they purchased from usually Polio or Sargento a huge box of this shelf-stable fake curd, and they've stretched it before you've come in, and it truly isn't the same food. So I know it's kind of an aside, but once you start playing around with milk, things like that become incredibly apparent to you, and you can see through all the marketing and advertising.
Sure. You're not really having the real thing anyway. So one of the things you talk about a lot, on Instagram is eliminating the links in your food chain. Walk me through what that means to you and a practical way of actually doing that to someone this isn't their whole life, or someone as knowledgeable as you, right?
My suggestion is literally as simple as taking a link out, right? Our food chains right now are so incredibly long that we don't know the people that raise the food, ship the food, cook the food, whatever. I mean, we don't know anybody in that food system. So we're so far distanced away from the source of this food that taking even one link away is really beneficial for everybody. It's beneficial to you and your family's health. It's beneficial to the food system. It's beneficial to the planet. I mean, it's a win-win all across the board. And one of the reasons I like saying it like this is because, we could have this conversation for 5 hours and we can dive deep into all sorts of things from plant toxins to homemade cheese. And then somebody's going to leave like, wow, this is overwhelming, and do nothing, right? The reality is any small step that you take in the right direction compounds day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, and is an incredible way to just start to dip your toes into this, and it's going to help. So I think an example I like to use is with meat. One of the weirdest things about the meat industry and purchasing meat, and I'm mostly what I eat is meat anyhow. You can go into the grocery store, and if you are focused and you all you want to do is get lean chicken, there's no reason to eat lean chicken breast, but let's say that you're of that mindset, I need to eat lean chicken breast. You can walk into the grocery store and literally put these blinders on, walk in, grab a package of lean chicken breast, walk out, and literally not see another part of an animal or even that chicken, right? Just the chicken. It's incredibly weird. It's incredibly strange. And then we start asking questions like, how much meat should I eat, and where? It's crazy. But if you go in there and say, hey, if you typically buy, chicken breast, buy the chicken. Like, buy the entire chicken. And I know some of us are like, oh my God, that's so much work. First off, you're going to save a massive amount of money. You are going to turn that one purchase into 3 meals instead of one. I mean, you have the chicken breast, then you can cook the legs and the thighs, and then you can take the rest of it and make bone broth. I mean, it's an incredible money saver and nutritional, way to access even more nutrition. but your mindset also starts to change. If you're already buying chickens, right? You go to the store and you buy your organic whatever chicken and you take it home. Great. But get it at the farmer's market instead. That's one more link out of that. And then you're actually meeting the farmer and the people that raise the chickens. And this continues all the way down the line. Those little steps are huge. If you're buying shredded cheese, buy a block of cheese. I mean, it does, I promise you, make a huge difference. So those little things compound over time. None of them are such a major lifestyle change that they're going to prohibit you from taking a step. And once one thing becomes routine, then you can go ahead and take the next step. But the reason I think it's so important, and I'm going to give you a quick example. 2 years ago, we were in Sardinia doing research on several things, but we ended up, and this was completely by mistake, not my mistake, but we didn't plan it this way. We ended up in the village of Villa Grande, which is the epicenter of the first blue zone ever identified. And for anybody who's been paying attention to the blue zone thing, right? These are where the populations around the world that have the longest span and health span, and they do. These people have great health spans, great long lives, very fulfilled long lives. The way their diets have been documented is completely wrong in almost every case. Is one of the things that we found. But what was beautiful is that every home that we ate in this village, and we ate multiple meals, and some of these meals were multi-course meals. Every single meal was the most connected meal we've ever had in our life. Like literally, we were sitting at these tables in this village, multi-course, amazing meals, and there wasn't one ingredient on the table that somebody at that table didn't harvest, grow, harvest,
Right.
all of it. Everything was done on that table except for the wine. And the woman that was there with us, her brother actually raised the grape and did the wine. So literally there was nothing. But think about how connected those people were. I'm confident that that's one of the major reasons. They didn't have questions. We have that population in the oldest, living the longest in the entire world. This village, it didn't have any nutritionists whatsoever. There was
Right.
they didn't have to ask any questions about
Right.
their food because they knew everything about it.
Yeah. Incredible. I love that part of the world, man. They live just so different than us in such a positive way. They're so connected with the means in which they make their food. And when I've been to that part of the world and you eat their food, it's just there's something different about it. Well, you just recently, or maybe not so recently, you went on a large kind of trip around the world with your family, right?
We're going around the world different places regularly.
Right. Okay. So it wasn't one big trip because I'm
It wasn't
following
one big
along
trip.
on social media. One of the fascinating things that I saw was I think you're in Africa and you kind of stumbled upon this village where you described them as probably the healthiest people you've ever met.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
Now this is coming from looking at them, right? I wasn't doing blood tests. I wasn't doing
Right.
AQs
No,
or
fair
these sorts
enough.
of things, right?
Right.
We had gone. This is several years ago. We went to Africa. I was speaking at Witwatersrand University in South Africa, and then we went to visit friends in Kenya who are cheesemakers. And there were two things that we wanted to study in Kenya. One was this traditional way of making something called mursik, which is this ash yogurt that's made in the west of Kenya in a couple villages. But the other part was, some people may already realize this, there are two groups in the world currently that subsist on a combination of blood and raw milk. And they drink it every single day, twice a day, and for certain times of the year, the men and the boys only eat this. That's their entirety of their diet.
Really?
And that's the Maasai and the Samburu. And both of them, there's many, obviously they're two different groups and there's many differences, but some of the similarities include they're what we call nomadic pastoralists. So they are interested, they engage in animal husbandry, they have animals, they don't grow plants. In fact, they eat hardly any plants whatsoever. But where they live and the way the seasons work is that their animals obviously are just eating naturally from the environment. During the dry season, everything dries up so much and is so tough that they have to eat massive amounts of vegetation to stay nourished. These are the animals.
Right.
Sometimes cows, typically cows. So during the dry season, there's not enough forage, there's not enough plants in the area for them to eat. So they just start going off and wandering. And so the men and the boys leave and follow them during the entire dry season. they eat from these cows, like I said, is the blood and the milk. And from our perspective, that sounds really, really strange. First off, we already spent 10 minutes talking about raw milk.
Right.
Raw milk. The other part is the blood, and to us, we equate blood with death. And one of our mindset shifts, even engaged in this conversation, is you have to understand they do not.
Right.
Blood to them is the same as milk. Blood is a renewable resource. So when they take the blood from the cows, they're not killing the cows. It's almost like the cows are giving blood at a blood bank. And the way that they did it, at least when we were there, experienced this, they took a cow, they brought it over, they tied a rope around its neck. It was very similar to how they put a rubber band around your arm before you're going to give blood or you get blood work done. So, and the jugular got huge, and they walked up to it with this little tiny, actually, hold on. This is the arrow from it.
Oh, wow.
So this is the arrow, and if you look close, it's got a little metal tip, but it's got all these this string wrapped around it so that it only goes in about half an inch, and then it stops. So they had this little tiny, look like it's from a kid's bow. This little tiny bow shot it into the jugular, and it goes in and pops out, and then you see this blood coming out in a fountain. And the cat caught it with a gourd. As soon as they caught enough, in this case, they caught about a liter of it, about a quart, they took the rope off its neck, threw a little bit of dirt up in the wound, and the cow walks off. In fact, the cow never even flinched. It never flinched. Walks away. They got a quart of blood from a cow. Think about how much blood you give when you give blood. The percentage of blood that came out of that cow was less for their body size than what we give. Walked away. And then they went to another cow, milked the cow, stirred the blood until it coagulated around a stick, and they fed that to the dog, and they took the blood and the milk, and everything is still warm, back and forth, and drank it. It was so incredibly satiating.
Wow.
I thought it tasted like an irony, salty chocolate milkshake.
Wow.
The rest of my family wasn't as excited about it. But think about this. When I saw these people, this group, everybody in this group, they just emitted health. I mean, health. Their eyes were so white. Their skin was so clear. They had these broad faces with these gorgeous teeth. I mean, we were in the middle. It took us 3 days to get to them from Nairobi. We were in the middle of nowhere. They stood tall. They smiled. All of the things that you would equate. They were muscular, but not like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean, they were muscular.
Lean.
Exactly. And were just happy, healthy people. And the basis of their diet was blood and milk. And I found it strange when I came back. I was teaching at Washington College at the time. I came back here on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and I was engaged in a lot of conversations in groups, officially in groups about food security and health and diet and all this. And I remember coming back after this experience a few months later, and I was, sitting here, and we're talking about human health and food and all these things. And I finally stopped, and I said, guys, listen, I just saw the healthiest people I've ever seen in my entire life. And the basis of their food is impossible for anybody here to get. Like, raw milk is illegal, and fresh blood is almost, you can't get, right? It's almost impossible to get. And we're sitting here trying to solve all these problems. And I'm not suggesting that everybody needs to drink raw milk and blood to be healthy, but we're only touching the tip of the iceberg for what is possible in the conversations that we're having. And again, they eat hardly any plants. They actually don't eat a lot of meat either, because that one cow that can provide a massive amount of blood and milk over its lifetime.
Yeah, it's better off alive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Is one big meal dead, or a life, or years and years and years worth of food?
Yeah, nice. So, that must have been an amazing trip, man. Take your kids to Kenya. I mean, right? You were with your children, right?
Oh yeah, the whole family was there. Yeah.
Yeah,
our youngest thought the cow was getting killed. And I mean, you can imagine, no matter how small the bow was compared to the cow. I mean, you see this bow and arrow, and then blood coming out of the neck.
Yeah, I mean, for a culture like ours, we don't even see the animal get butchered. Maybe your kids do, but I mean, just coming from the West, we don't even connect that life and death. Watching an animal die so we can eat it. So for that, Western eyes, that must have been something. Well, so let's talk about greens, because I know that in your book, especially with spinach and how we've industrialized some of the things that we look at as health food, I think you have a different take. And then this is not in your book, but with nightshades, I think the reason I bring up nightshades is because Tom Brady, when he went on that TB12 diet, and they all busted his chops because he wouldn't eat nightshades. And anyway, I just wanted to get your take on that, and then maybe touch on spinach and all the other green stuff that we eat, and what your take is on that.
So one thing to start this part of the conversation off, the kind of constant throughout our dietary past is diversity. So if one of the things you're trying to do is eat in a more traditional or ancestral way, one aspect of that is eating a lot of different things. I know people that are on this carnivore path will, if they can afford it, they'll eat a ribeye every single night. And listen, I love ribeye, but that's not ancestrally accurate either. First of all, there weren't any cows in the past anyhow, but nobody ate the same cut from the same animal every single night.
Right.
The reality is we have, and some of the estimations are, and it depends on the time period and the culture and the part of the world you're in, but somewhere between several hundred different plants and dozens of different animals in our diet on a yearly basis. I mean, that's it. And one of the cool things about diversity is I can promise you, anything I say on this podcast today, I 1000% believe in. And I can also promise you I'm wrong about something.
Sure.
I don't know it yet, but there's something wrong.
Yeah.
And we're finding out all these different things all the time. So if somebody's telling you this is what you should be doing and do this every single day and just that, the chances are you're going to be missing something. So there's safety in diversity in a lot of different ways, which is where we get into the plants. But we have been eating plants well before we were eating meat. We were eating plants and bugs well before we were eating meat. And the entire time we're eating meat, certain populations, obviously in the Arctic and extreme latitudes, vegetables made up a very little part of the diet. But in general, plants were a part of our diet. That said, every single plant on this planet has some level of toxin in it. They do. I mean, they cannot move. They have to protect themselves, and they do this through chemical warfare. Now, this isn't meant to scare anybody because a lot of the toxins that these plants produce, we either get no effect from or we actually celebrate. So a great example is cinnamon. Cinnamon, the flavor in cinnamon comes from the bark of a tree. The flavor that we love in cinnamon is actually a insecticide. It's there to keep insects off of the tree. And in small doses, we love it. We love it on our cookies and our chai, whatever. But in larger doses, it can be used as a medicine. And in much larger doses, it could actually make us incredibly sick. So these toxins are there. Sometimes we celebrate them. Sometimes they can make us sick. Sometimes they can kill us. And sometimes they don't cause much issue at all. The problem becomes when some of these low-level toxins build up in our bodies over time. And one of the things people are talking about now are oxalates, which I had a huge issue with. And I know for some people, like, whoa, what does all this mean? I can't eat vegetables anymore. Let me just spend 3 minutes talking about how plants defend themselves. And right away, it can transform or at least frame the way you think about plants and toxins. Plants are trying to protect themselves, and it costs them energy to produce these toxins. So when they're doing it, they're only doing it where it's very important. And they're not doing it across the board. And plants are doing it in very different ways. So in general, roots, corms, tubers, these what we call underground storage organs, plants that have a root structure where they're putting a lot of carbohydrates and living off those carbohydrates for part of the year, that's in a very important part of the plant. So take a potato, for example. Potato would spend the spring and the summer engage in photosynthesis above the ground, creating all these carbohydrates that they store in the root so that when the top of the plant dies off, it can live off of that in the fall and the winter and then start the process over again. So that's a very important part of the plant. Those, you can safely bet that those parts of the plants are highly, highly protected through chemicals. And most of those chemicals are going to occur in the skin and the outside of the root or the corm or the tuber, because that's where the protection needs to really happen. That's why, and I can tell you stories later on, but I will never eat a potato skin for the rest of my life. The majority of the toxins in a potato occur in the skin.
Really?
Any traditional group that has been using potatoes for a long period of time always peels the potatoes. I have tons of experience that I can tell you about this. So at least peel potatoes and sweet potatoes and underground storage organs like that. When you get above the ground, the shoots, the leaves, the stems, that sort of thing, they can or cannot have different levels of toxin, and it can vary throughout the life cycle of the plant, the season, those sorts of things. A great example is dandelions. Dandelion leaves in the spring and early summer, and bitterness is a very good indicator of toxins. They're slightly bitter in the spring and the early summer, but palatable and fairly safe to eat. When you get into the middle of the summer, the toxin load increases. They're too bitter to eat, which is an indicator we shouldn't be eating them then. And then in the fall, it lowers the toxin level again, and they're a little more edible. So it varies, and it's hard to nail down. But the rest of the plant is very, very telling. For as much as the plant is trying to keep things away, fungus, disease, mold, insects, predators, whatever, for certain parts of the plant, it wants to attract in two cases. One is the flower. A flower is designed, it's beautiful, it smells good, and either has low or no toxins in it at all, because the role of the flower is to attract pollinating insects and that sort of thing. So it's not going to kill those insects off, it's attracting. So flowers are usually, not always, but are usually incredibly safe to eat without, in some cases, without any processing at all. The fruit is a completely different thing. Seeds, nuts, grains, and legumes are the babies of the plant. They're the next generation. They are usually the most highly guarded through all sorts of chemicals. I don't care whether it is a kidney bean, it is a wheat berry, it is a nut, whatever it is, all of these things are the next generation of the plant. In every single case, if you're going to consume that part of the plant, you have to do some sort of processing. But we'll get to that in 1 second. The other part of the plant, the last one, is the fruit. The role of a fruit, and this is very important, is to do something similar to as the flower, is to attract an animal to eat the fruit when the seeds are mature. Because when they eat the fruit, when the seeds are mature, and only when they're mature, then the seeds will go through their digestive tract and get planted in a pile of manure somewhere else. It doesn't make sense for this to happen before the seeds are mature. So almost every single fruit on the world, including bananas, are either highly toxic or slightly toxic when the seeds are still immature. When the seeds are fully mature, the toxin switches off. They become beautiful. They smell good. They taste good. They're very sweet. There's very little toxins or no toxins at all. And then this happens. So this is how the plant operates. With that in mind now, a couple things that are very good standard practices. One is, if it is an underground storage organ, at minimum, you have to peel it. We just got back a couple weeks ago. We were in the Amazon in Brazil. We were learning how to process a plant called manioc, bitter manioc. And bitter manioc is an incredibly poisonous plant, but it is the staple food in the Amazon. It is the staple food in parts of South America. It is such a staple food that it even has gone to Africa and is a staple food in many places there. The bitter manioc version of this has cyanide-producing compounds. It will make you incredibly sick or kill you if you eat it. But if you process it properly, there's a lot of products that are made out of it, including tapioca. So tapioca, if anybody's had tapioca flour, tapioca pudding, it is actually made from this plant, but has already gone through all of this processing. So you need to process things in some cases. Flowers are typically very safe, but fruit, again, make sure it is a ripe fruit. Now, there's a lot of reasons not to eat fruit if people are worried about carbohydrates and fructose and other things, which is a whole other conversation. From a toxin level, I would only eat ripe fruit. I know there's some people that are worried about carbs and they're starting to eat like unripe bananas because it has a lower available sugar content. There's no reason to do that whatsoever. But seeds, nuts, grains, and legumes, anytime, I would never eat any of those raw. I would never eat. So our rule in our house and our rule here at the restaurant is all seeds, nuts, grains, and legumes are either soaked, sprouted, nixtamalized, or fermented, or a combination of those before we put them into food or consume them on every case. And some of these techniques are really basic, but they're powerful. So a great example is our kidney beans. One thing I wrote about in the book, 3 raw red kidney beans would land you in the hospital if you ate them. But if you simply soak them overnight and then cook them the next day, they become many people would argue, a very safe and nourishing food to eat. Same thing, but that processing is the key. Sourdough bread is a completely different food than non-fermented bread. Another great example. So we're talking about the nightshades, and this is where this comes in. Fruits are generally safe, generally. it's the seeds that cause a lot of the issues in many cases, especially if you get into the seeds. Seeds are meant to pass through our digestive tract. There's something called
Right.
scarification that, in fact, there's some seeds that require passing through an animal's digestive tract to be able to sprout once they're on the other end. They require it. They're built. They are physically designed to literally shoot through digest. They look like bullets because they do that, right?
Right.
And they're chemically designed to withstand it too. So a tomato is in the nightshades, and here's an awesome example. My grandmother had my grandmother's Italian. She's from Italy. She loves tomatoes. In her later in her life, she had all sorts of issues with her feet anytime she ate tomatoes. I mean, anytime she ate tomatoes, and it didn't. She still ate the tomatoes.
Right.
I have a very similar thing. Like if I eat a tomato, and I love the taste of a tomato, and especially I remember as a kid going and getting the cherry tomatoes.
Right.
It's like you take it off the vine. It's like literally eating a piece of sunshine that explodes in your mouth. I mean, it's amazing.
Yes.
I will feel it in my feet the next day. But what I found is when we are making tomato sauce or doing other things with tomatoes, and I've removed the skin and the seeds, I have no issues whatsoever. So, and that falls right into play with what I was just saying. It isn't the skin and the seeds are where most of those issues are going to take place. They're protecting the seeds because it's the next generation of the plant. The skin is a protective barrier. The flesh of the fruit is a different thing. So it becomes so much, and I know people don't want to find anything that's any more complicated, but it's much more complicated saying all nightshades are bad. All of this is bad.
Right.
It is okay. Which ones are they, and what are you doing to them? That's a great example. But another thing for people who are feeling a little overwhelmed right now, that is very helpful, I think, is not only to frame your idea of a plant and how it is surviving in the world in the way that I just mentioned, but also to consider seasonality in your eating patterns.
Right.
There's a good friend of mine. His name is Cian Foley. He lives in Waterford in Ireland. He's a great guy. When he was in his late 30s, and he wrote a book called Don't Eat for Winter, is the name of his book. When he was in his late 30s, he was eating an apple in the middle of winter, looking out in his front yard, and he had an apple tree in his front yard. And he was overweight. He was, not happy with his body, and he was sitting there eating this apple and looking outside, and he looks at the tree. He's like, "My God, there's no apple. I'm eating this apple, but there's no apples on my apple tree.
Right.
No, there's not even any leaves on my apple tree." So he literally overnight decided the change he was going to make in his diet is to eat seasonally. That's it. He's just going to eat what grew in his area when it grew in his area, and that was it. And what he found is body transformed. He is now a international drug-free bodybuilding champion. He's an international kettlebell champion. His body's amazing, but several things happened. One is the reason he did that was he realized, and the title of his book is Don't Eat for Winter, because the plants that are available to consume at the end of the summer and into the fall are your very high carbohydrate plants. And, mammals especially, but animals have adapted in temperate regions to eat these foods, put fat on for winter, because these foods put a lot of fat on you,
Right.
and then use it over winter. So a couple things happened as a result of this. One is his body transformed. Wow. The other thing is that if you're eating a plant like oxalates, which are very difficult to get out through processing, something like spinach. If you ate spinach, is very high in oxalates, very dangerous toxin. I've had multiple years of suffering because of oxalates. A lot of our superfoods like spinach and almonds are loaded with oxalates, and because we've labeled them as superfoods, people are eating them every day. Some people are eating them multiple times a day. If you eat seasonally, if spinach itself isn't a bad thing if you're eating it the 2 or 3 weeks out of the year it grows in your yard, but if you're eating it 365 days, you've created a problem that wasn't even a possibility in the past. So that's one thing. Eating seasonally helps regulate. If you have maybe a couple weeks of a higher level, something come into your diet, then all of a sudden it's not there.
Right.
That's the second thing that he found, and this maybe it blew my mind. Hopefully it's going to blow somebody else's mind too. We have this ideal. We've grown up. I grew up looking at muscle and fitness magazines my entire life, and Mr. Olympia and whatever muscle mass they have, and also the very low body fat percentage they have. And I had this image in my head, like so many people have, that okay, the ideal The perfectly healthy human has this incredibly low body fat percentage, and they keep it the entire year. That's not natural. I mean, this guy, Kean Foley, is a great example. Yes, is he in incredible shape? Yes, but his body fat changes throughout the year, just like all the other animals, because he's eating what's seasonal. And when he's eating the summer and the fall, fruits and other things, his body fat goes up, and then he goes over the winter, and then his body fat it goes back down.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Yeah. That's really interesting because we've kind of removed ourselves from the natural cycle of Earth, really, by commercializing and making stuff available year round. I've never kind of thought of it that way. So that's something interesting to think about. Is if we have almonds, and I think you mentioned this in your book, like if we had, if we have a basket of almonds we're chewing at, or we're eating from all the time, that wasn't available to our ancestors, and that seed has or nut has a lot of toxins in it, and so we've labeled it a health food to your point, and we're scarfing it down. It's in granola, it's in trail mix, it's in all this other snack food that we eat. So I never actually put my mind to thinking, what if we eat what's seasonal? Which makes complete sense because you're saying we kind of fatten up, not really, I'm using air quotes here, you fatten up for the winter by having the high carbs and this caloric food. You lean out during the winter, and then the cycle kind of just keeps folding you through. So then that seems like a much healthier way of living rather than having, apples year round, or the high carbohydrates. That's an interesting thought.
And further, as much the other side too. As much as it's more natural to maybe potentially eat those things during certain times of the year, it's unnatural to be at 4% body fat for 365 days.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
so, and that's what I meant earlier by taking these links out of your food chain. We could sit here and talk all day long. I mean, I could dive into a 2-hour conversation about oxalates, and we could talk about fermentation, and all of those things are fantastic and very worthy of a conversation. But if all that you do is start getting a little bit closer to your food, it becomes so much. Some of it's intuitive. Like if you got closer to your food and started shopping a little more locally and supporting local farmers and eating a little more seasonally at the same time, a lot of the things that we could spend time talking about here are almost irrelevant because they've taken care of themselves. If you're listening to People magazine tell you need to eat spinach every single day, and you go to the grocery store and you can get spinach every single day, and that's what you're eating, you're creating a problem that wouldn't have been a problem, with the earlier example.
Right. Right. Those are two good overarching rules to live by. And I'm certainly going to try. I'll have my wife listen to this. She makes all our food, and she's super, very, very careful about what she feeds our kids. But one thing I want to get to before we wrap is sourdough bread, because I saw you, mention on your social media handle, or you were being interviewed, the sourdough bread at the grocery store is probably not sourdough bread, or not, maybe not probably, but you need to be careful. So walk us through the difference between the bread in the grocery store, sourdough or otherwise, and how we should be consuming it from your perspective.
Absolutely. So, real quick, you're right. It's probably if you're getting sourdough bread at a grocery store, a big box store, or a restaurant, it's probably not sourdough. It doesn't mean it's not. It probably is not sourdough. Let me tell you what sourdough is real quick, why it's important, and then real quick what to look for.
Yeah, take your time. I want to be respectful of your time, not the other way around. I could chat with you for hours.
But... No, I have for 1 minute anyhow, so I'll do it quickly. It's fine.
Okay.
So just like with dairy, bread has been around for a little over 8,000 years. The earliest loaf of bread ever found, and the oldest loaf of bread ever found right now, was found in Turkey at a site called Katahoyuk. Every loaf of bread in the world ever made up until the mid-1800s was by default sourdough. In nature, wild bacteria and wild yeast in the right environment work together at the same time. So when yeast eats the available sugars, whether it is in bread or alcohol making or whatever, it produces two things: carbon dioxide and alcohol. So that's great. We still use yeast in modern commercial bread in most cases because the yeast is producing the carbon dioxide that makes the bread rise. When that was operating for 8,000 years, it also had a bacterial fermentation happening side by side. That bacterial fermentation, we're eating the available sugars. producing all sorts of things, including lactic acid, but transforming. It's the bacterial fermentation that transforms the gluten into a safer and more nourishing form. It actually takes the gluten and cuts it up into its individual amino acid parts, which makes it more digestible to us. It does a lot of different things chemically and physically to detoxify those grains. It also produces all the flavor. It produces all the aroma. It produces the texture. Everything that is amazing about the act of taking wheat berries or another grain and turning it into a loaf of bread, other than it rising, is all because of the bacteria. In the mid-1800s, Louis Pasteur took in a lab and separated bacteria and yeast and made, and for the first time ever, made it possible to make a loaf of bread rise without that bacterial fermentation happening side by side. And then a few years later, the Fleischmann brothers were able to produce it in a factory, and all the Fleischmann's yeast we get at the grocery store is a result of what was happening in the mid-1800s. The modern industrial food system loves that because it's very predictable. You can purchase the yeast, do its thing, make it rise. It looks like bread, and you're good. The problem is they took that other part of it away, and it's that other part that is responsible for not only the flavor development and the aromas that I mentioned, but also any potential health benefits and safety benefits from making bread were now gone because of that. So real sourdough bread is a combination of wild bacteria and wild yeast working side by side and transforming those grains into something that's more digestible and more nourishing for our bodies. What has happened over the past 100 and almost 75 years is that the food system is making, bread without bacteria and just yeasted bread, but also there's no regulation in this country and in most countries that standards you have to meet to call something sourdough bread. You can call anything sourdough bread. So because it has that label sourdough bread, it actually is meaningless. That label is absolutely meaningless. And in most cases, we have this misinformed consumer idea that sourdough bread is supposed to taste sour. It doesn't have to. It can, but it doesn't have to. And because the expectation is that it's supposed to taste sour, what the food system has done is say, hey, we're going to make regular yeasted bread because that's the most commercially viable option for us. And we're going to add something sour in there to make it taste sour because that's what people are expecting. And then we're going to jack up the price. And there's a big push for sourdough bread right now and for health benefits. And we're going to put it on the shelf. And it's 100% legal to do so. And then we as uninformed consumers don't understand that that isn't sourdough bread. So here's what you need to look for. Number one, the fact that the bread that you're looking at says sourdough bread, it is maybe in a beautiful brown paper package and it's near the deli as opposed to over by the Wonder Bread does not mean by default that it's sourdough bread. The fact that it costs more does not mean that it's sourdough. Turn it over, and there's two key things to look for. One is, does it say yeast in the ingredients? Sourdough bread requires three things: flour, water, and salt. That's it. So they may be putting rye berries in there or walnuts or cherries or something, but the only things you need to make bread, real genuine sourdough bread, is water, flour, and yeast. If there's anything else on that label besides flour, water, yeast, start to pay attention. If it says yeast, that means they've artificially added commercial yeast into it. Now, that doesn't by default mean that it's not sourdough bread. It's a very good indicator that it's probably not, but I do know we don't do it, but I do know sourdough bakers that are putting it through that full wild bacteria and yeast fermentation and are also adding a little bit of yeast to make it a little more
airy or
a little loftier or what have you. If it says yeast, it probably isn't sourdough, but it still could be. The big indicator is if it says anything sour on it whatsoever. So lactic acid, citric acid, or acetic acid, which is vinegar. Sometimes they just say vinegar. If any of those things are on there, then I can guarantee you it's not sourdough. It's a baker that's making it with yeast and making you think it's sourdough because they've actually made it sour. If you want to still buy it and pay the extra money, go ahead and buy it. But if you're looking for sourdough, turn it over and put it back on the shelf. Right. The best ways to ensure that you're getting sourdough bread is to, make it yourself at home, which is very easy to do, or go to an actual bakery where the person you're talking to is the person that has actually made the bread or at least knows enough about what's happening in their shop to be able to tell you what's happening there.
Yeah, thanks for that. I learned a lot on that one. You know, when you explained what you just explained, I was like, really? That they just put vinegar in it? I'm like, that's something we should know about.
We
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
it should be illegal, but
Right. Well, Bill, this is our hour's up. I really want to thank you for taking the time and spreading the word here. You're doing really good work. Your book, Eat Like a Human, not only was it really educational, but the recipes inside are actually implementable,
right.
approachable, and a few I've tried with my wife. They're pretty tasty. The chicken liver pate was really good. And
Oh, it's
I love
standard.
chicken. I love chicken liver. And so before we end, maybe you could tell us where we can find you, what you're working on, or just give us some information. I know Modern Stone Age is your restaurant, and you do have some online classes, if I'm not mistaken. Do you?
Yeah,
Or yeah. So
we do.
tell us about that.
We're actually launching something really exciting right now as we speak. So a Modern Stone Age is we have two things under this sort of umbrella as Modern Stone Age. One is our restaurant, Modern Stone Age Kitchen. So everything we talked about over the past hour and a whole bunch of other things we hold as standards that we do and don't do here. Apply to everything that we make. We make everything 100% from scratch in-house. There's no two ingredients put together outside of our walls. We are actually making familiar food as nourishing as it can be using ancestral and traditional methods. So you could bring your entire family here. Everybody would recognize the menu. Everybody in your family could order something and you could feel really good about them eating it because it is the most nourishing form of that. I can promise you that. We're in Chestertown, Maryland, so we're about an hour from DC, about an hour and a half from Philly, and about 3 hours from New York City. It's not very hard to get to us. We also have a nonprofit called the Modern Stone Age Food Lab, and this is any of our research or teaching or outreach is funneled through that. So we do have a few online classes. Almost every week we have in-person classes, everything from home cheese making to home butchering, sourdough, all sorts of things. But have been asked so many times to provide opportunities for people that necessarily can't get here. So what we literally have just launched an online community where we are meeting every Monday. Every Monday there will be a half hour or so, short cooking class on something from refreshing sourdough mother to making kefir, all of the things we've talked about, and then time for questions and answer afterwards. And everything's archived, so you can always access it. And we're just trying to provide that extra step for somebody. I want to do this. I've read about it. I watched a YouTube video, but they just don't want to, don't feel comfortable necessarily taking that step. We want to provide that resource for you to take that step and then ask questions and have a whole bunch of follow-ups. So all that can be found at modernstoneage.com, which is our website. Online, we have two profiles online. Anything to do with the kitchen is The Modern Stone Age. On Instagram and Facebook, and then anything that has to do with sort of that research teaching piece is through me at Dr. Bill Schindler, so at Dr. Bill Schindler.
Right on. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate your time. We're going to put all that information in the show notes, so it'll be clickable and easy to access. I really appreciate your time and keep up the good work, and I'll be following along. And you're the type of guy I'd love to have back on, after a while and check in with you, man, because you're doing great stuff. And that's our cue.
I have to do something in the kitchen. That's what we're alarmed for. Listen, I'd love to be back on. Thank you for all that you do, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share what we're working on.
Thank you, Bill. Take care. Thanks for walking the last easy mile with me. If something in today's episode moved you, good. That means there's still something alive in you worth pursuing. But don't let it end here. Send the message, try the thing, start the shift. If this episode helped, like, subscribe, and share with someone else who might be feeling stuck. You never know who needs to hear exactly this. I'm Josh Farahi. Until next time, keep walking.